Hey, what's up, universe? It's 5:34 p.m. on Sunday, August 6th, 2023. I went ahead, I'm just going to roll into another video on another section of stuff that I was going to do. That previous video was all about AI and existential threat and just that kind of a thing. So what was coming up for me, again, like last night, I was having a conversation with my friend Mac in the UK a little bit, and we've talked about like cryptocurrency and things like this. And there's a couple things for me that come up around, central banks, monetary policy, and cryptocurrencies and things like that. And so that's what this video is going to be on about. It's going to be a little bit a tangential kind of, just different things that have kind of come up in other things that I've run into as I've researched this particular topic, and some thoughts that I have around it. So the first thing that comes to my mind is around central banks in the first place. And when one starts to research central banks, one will find that central banks are not actually a formal part of any government entity. They are an independent body that issues the currency of the country, defines monetary policy, and is basically in control of the money system. Now, this is in direct opposition to what a treasury is. When a country or government finances itself, they have a treasury. And that's what we used to have here in the United States before the forming of the Federal Reserve. I believe it was in 1913 under Woodrow Wilson. Now, central banks are a curious thing because they are independent. And it was kind of an interesting conversation with ChatGPT that I had around central banks. So I'll read some of that just to kind of give you an idea here. And this goes back, the reason I kind of was thinking about this is, the fall of the Roman Empire and things of this nature. Voltaire has said before that all fiat currency goes back to its intrinsic value, which is zero. And basically what a fiat currency is that somebody, a group of people or whatever, has decreed that this money is worth something. It's not pegged to anything that has any particular intrinsic value. It's just that a group has said, hey, this is money. And that's why it always goes back to zero, because it's not worth anything. You know what I mean? It's somebody's word. Or, as we can probably start to deduce through the history of central banks and the state of conflict across the globe, it's through the barrel of a gun. The decree is take the money or die. And after World War II, the U.S. was in a very prosperous position to have what is known as the world reserve currency. And that means that everybody that needs to buy oil has to buy oil in U.S. dollars, which means every country on the planet that ever wanted to buy oil has to have some, at least, U.S. dollars. And that's why, things like the BRICS, the BRIC, Brazil, Russia, was it India, China, and I forget, is it Spain? I can't recall. That may not be correct. It's been a minute since I researched that, but that's why these economic, geopolitical things that you hear about are actually, concerns. And in my opinion, it's really what we go to war for. A lot of people say we go to war for oil, and I think that's a euphemism in a way, because it's more about going to war to keep our world reserve currency status. Now, being an American, even though that I am homeless and rather penniless, even though I'm in this hotel, I absolutely enjoy the benefits still of living in a country that has the world reserve currency. Life would look a lot different in America if we didn't have that. Now, the thing with having been in the situation that I'm in now and having an appreciation for being unbanked in a way and being disconnected from a lot of the Western financial services and the things that it allows individuals to participate in and do, I can appreciate the idea behind cryptocurrencies and behind Bitcoin. Having traveled to places like Fiji and Costa Rica, I can certainly appreciate how there's cultures and societies, countries in the world where their populations don't have access to all the same financial services, or nor do they enjoy the same wealth that we enjoy in America. And so to redistribute that, or to provide a playing field that is, when we look at central banks, because they're independent from the governments that they serve, these are really very powerful institutions that are not beholden to the countries that they serve. They're really entities that are just beholden unto themselves. And it was funny when I was, to go back to the Roman Empire thing. Rome fell primarily because it started to debase its currency under Emperor Nero. That he started to remove the amount of precious metal, gold and silver, that was in the coins, but also kept the face value the same. So the coins themselves were actually intrinsically losing value because the gold and the silver, yet people needed to treat it still as the same value that it had, even though it had less gold and silver. And that's basically what fiat is. Nero decreed that these coins and this currency still have the same value, even though the things that intrinsically gave those things value was becoming less and less and less. And so if you research kind of what's been happening over the last couple of decades, you may hear the term the Great Race to Debase. And that's where every country is basically, their central banks are racing to debase their currency, because that impacts the strength of a country's currency, will impact its ability to import and export. And there's a lot of economics that plays into this. And it's a silent war in a way. Inflation is also the silent thief. It's a silent tax on the people of the country, to be honest. And so there's definitely forms of economic warfare at play. And that's one of the things that, again, if we were to take a look at history, if somebody were to do a critical study of global conflict, both with wars and endless protracted unwinnable things such as the war on drugs, the war on terrorism, these are things that there's no end goal. There's no way to complete that objective. So it keeps the country, keeps the United States anyway, in a state of war in perpetuity. And that actually does impact what the Federal Reserve and other central banks are allowed to do, and how that impacts the economy, how that impacts monetary policy, and other things of this nature. Now, there's a real interesting quote here, or it's an abstract. It's not even a quote. There's a publication that you can find on the Cambridge University Press. It's called Central Banks at War. It was published and released on October 21st, 2014, and it's written by Paul, and I may say his name incorrectly. Is it Post? It's P-O-A-S-T. Let me just read you the abstract. It says, "War is expensive. Troops must be equipped and weapons must be procured. when the enormous borrowing requirements of war make the sovereign's credibility problem more difficult, which means the sovereigns means, the government. Okay, let me go back. When the enormous borrowing requirements of war make the sovereign's credibility problem more difficult, so we'll just substitute sovereign, you could say the United States. When war makes the United States credibility problem more difficult, central banks, the Federal Reserve, enhance the government's ability to borrow. By being the sole direct purchaser of government debt, the central bank increases the effective punishment that can be imposed on the government for defaulting on the marginal lender. This increases lenders' confidence that the government will be punished in case of default, making lenders willing to purchase the debt at a lower rate of interest. The sovereign, United States, dependent on the low borrowing costs offered by the central bank, the Federal Reserve, has an incentive to retain the bank. Data covering the 19th and early 20th centuries reveal that possessing a central bank lowers the sovereign's, United States, borrowing costs, particularly during times of war. Which means to say that while the United States is in a perpetual state of conflict, the United States has lower borrowing costs. We're able to get money at a lower rate. Okay, there's an incentive to be in perpetual conflict. And that's pretty much true with any central bank. You can put in, the UK or England and the Bank of England. You could put in Syria, because I don't believe Syria had a central bank until the shit hit the fan. And it's just an interesting thing with that. The thing with cryptocurrencies, to switch over to that I don't hear people talk about is that there's an infrastructure that is required for these cryptocurrencies to operate and exist on. It's not just the computational resources, which is in and of itself infrastructure. And yes, I understand things like the Lightning Network and nodes and being able to distribute these things and not have it be so centralized around the miners of these cryptocurrencies. What I've always talked about and have been curious about is the actual communication infrastructure. These things require physical networks of communication. Even if you were to do a mesh network of devices over wireless and had cell phones create a very resilient mesh network, there is still at the backbone going to be a physical layer of communication to where all this data is being transmitted and received. Now, who owns that and who controls that? I know for sure here in the United States, and I believe in other countries as well, the communications infrastructure is a national security asset. These are controlled things. You don't get to just do whatever you want on these services, or you don't get to do whatever you want to these services. These are controlled environments. These are controlled pieces of infrastructure. And so the whole idea, right, behind these cryptocurrencies is to decentralize, currency and to take the power back, so to speak. And I'm like, well, that's all well and good, except for how do you do that when the very infrastructure that's required for these cryptocurrencies is still under the control of the very people and entities that you're trying to remove yourself from? I haven't heard anybody talk about that, nor have I heard of any solutions around that. Furthermore, to go to my previous video, the advent of quantum computing is going to destroy cryptocurrencies. Because as you heard before, like that one supercomputer from Google doing a calculation in like 6.5 seconds that would take another supercomputer about 47 years to calculate, you can imagine what kind of havoc that might wreak on cryptocurrencies. It would render them useless, especially if something like LK99 actually becomes a reality and everybody can have a supercomputer or a quantum computer in their pocket. Now, could you have other cryptocurrencies? Are there cryptocurrencies that are being developed that are, how do I want to say, resilient to these things? Yes, sure. So that, I'm not saying that those technologies don't exist. I'm not saying there aren't people that aren't working on surmounting that particular kind of a problem. Yet, I still think the same thing is going to exist. How do you remove that from the control of the communication? I don't know. To me, that's a big question, and I would love to have somebody, talk about that because either I'm missing something or I'm obtuse, or perhaps both. That kind of a thing. So that is. I'm just trying to think here if. Yeah, another thing to kind of talk about real quick related to that is I think Sam Altman, if I have his name right, from OpenAI, the CEO of OpenAI, is working on WorldCoin, which is about identity verification. And it's basically using the blockchain to store biometric information so that it could be used as a resilient public identity ledger using like iris scans and other biometric information. And there are, I forgot where they started obtaining that information. I want to say Africa, but I could be incorrect. And there's just all sorts of things about that, or it's just kind of like, again, it goes back to what I was talking about in the previous video around the consolidation of power. Who controls what? Who has access to what? And again, I'm skeptical, especially when it comes to corporations and business interests and things like that have sole access to this stuff or that are developing this stuff. I'm not sure of an entity that exists that is really altruistic, entirely. And so I'm not sure how much I really trust this WorldCoin idea. But again, it's interesting times that we're living in. So there's a lot of interesting technology that's coming out and being developed. And to me, it just raises a lot of our subconscious and the state of the human condition. To me, it brings all of that to a very clear blank canvas for us all to look at, because it's actually going to be something that we all have to deal with. It's kind of like the saying where it's like, just because you're not interested in politics doesn't mean that politics isn't interested in you. And the same thing could be said about like AI or WorldCoin or something like that. Just because you're not interested in AI doesn't mean that AI is not interested in you. Just because you're not interested in WorldCoin doesn't mean that WorldCoin is not interested in you. So just these things that are being developed that if as a species we choose to be passive and we choose to not have a major public discourse around this and talk about it like at our dinner tables, if we even have those anymore, if we don't talk about them through our Facebooks and Instagrams and TikToks, how about that? Forget the dinner table, that's long gone. If we don't talk about it, then other people are going to talk about it and things are going to be defined, and then we may find ourselves in a very interesting, precarious situation. Now, one thing that's related to the AI video that I didn't talk about was that, again, I forget this guy's last name, Max, though. One of his things about AI is that the gradual disempowerment of the human species, to the point where we become so dependent upon it that even if it turns out to be quote unquote bad for us, we can't unplug ourselves from it, because to do so would be catastrophic. And it's an interesting again, that's covered in the monk debate. So if you want to go check that out, certainly look that up. That's an interesting line of thought. So it's not like Terminators rising up with like laser guns and all this kind of a thing. It's just the way that technology evolves and the way that we find ourselves being disenfranchised by it, or like disempowered by it, I should say. And just kind of, there could be a point of no return, right? An event horizon where it's like, well, now what do we do? So, an interesting thought. All right. Thank you again for listening. Thanks for being here. Thanks for journeying with me. And I love you guys. I'll talk to you later. Bye. It's 5:55. Bye.